Hey there, Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, I need to catch up on the Fat Electrician's most popular videos, and I have not seen this one, and it is in his top 3 most viewed videos. It's called the infamous Eager Beavers and their custom B17 bomber Old 666. All right, to be in the top 3 all-time of his videos is gotta say a lot, because the guy's a phenomenon here on YouTube. So I'm excited to learn and hopefully teach some things on the way. Our original video is linked down below. Make sure you're supporting him. He's been such a friend of the channel. Make sure to buy all his awesome merch, like this hat I love. You see me wearing a lot of videos. And let's get started. You know, at first I thought it was that video about those beavers that they like airdropped into Oregon or whatever. But then I looked closer and I was like, oh wait, this is actually something else, but you know, has beavers or something about beavers or just referencing beavers. I mean, I don't really know, so we'll see.
This is a story of a B-17 pilot and a bombardier, 2 anti-heroes that become best friends and assemble their bombing crew out of a bunch of misfits that don't fit in anywhere else, and they become adamant on doing things their own way. So much so that the US government won't even give them a B-17 to fly. They then proceed to build their own and become the most heavily decorated air crew in US history.
Let's go.
Today we're talking about Jay Zeamer, Joe Sarnofsky, and their air crew, the Eager Beavers, the most decorated air crew in US history, responsible for completing the most decorated mission in US history, all while flying the most heavily armed bomber of World War II, Lucy, aka Old 666.
Dude, this thing is awesome, and having it named like the 666, the mark of the beast, that thing that makes it even cooler and like more fearsome. But look at this thing. This thing is totally armored out. It's got like a gun nest on the top of it. By the way, reaching for something here to hold. You ever do that? You ever just like grab something? Well, that's where Fume comes in. It's not about quitting, it's about replacing. Fume, the sponsor of today's video, offers a simple and enjoyable way to break away from bad habits while still having something satisfying to reach for. It's kind of like what I did with my dog Frankie when he was a puppy. He would chew something he wasn't supposed to. Now, I heard that instead of just saying like, Frankie, no, stop, but to give him something else to chew on, like a chew toy. Lo and behold, it worked. No more chewing on my furniture. Fume doesn't use smoke, vapor, or nicotine. It's just natural flavored air that gives you something to reach for without all the bad chemicals. My favorite is the crisp mint, but there are tons of options from like citrusy flavors to like earthy, refreshing ones. So, you know, swap in your favorite. Over 500,000 people have already added Fume to their daily routine, and I totally get it. It's simple, it's satisfying, and it doesn't come with any of the downsides of smoking or vaping. And right now, if you order the Journey Pack using my code Terry, you'll get a free Fume topper. So if you've been thinking about changing your habits, this is the perfect first step. So go to tryfume.com/Terry or scan the QR code on the screen and grab yours today.
Starting off with our pilot and main character, Jay Zeamer. Born in 1918, he grew up in Pennsylvania with a pretty wealthy family. For high school, he was sent to a military boarding school in Culver, Indiana. While there as a freshman, despite the school's policy on no students having vehicles, he managed to acquire a Willys Motor Company Whippet, the direct predecessor of the Jeep. And he managed to turn this...
Acquire? Is it the steal, strategically take of something? It's on the shirt. You know, you're just borrowing it, okay?
Thing into an absolute hot rod, better than it ever ran before, until the school finally found out that a student had a car, which is against the rules. So he had a disciplinary meeting with the dean. He goes into this meeting with the dean and he's like, look, I'm in the engineering program. I'm taking all the engineering classes. I want to go to school to be an engineer. I just rebuilt a motor and I'm 14 years old. You guys should treat this as extra credit. To which the dean, being cool, is like, well, take me for a test drive and we'll see. Takes the dean for a test drive. Dean has a great time. He ends up giving him extra credit and letting him keep the car the entire time he's at military boarding school. So his grades were a little lackluster his freshman year because he was busy restoring a car. After that, he aced absolutely everything from sophomore to senior year. He goes on to apply to go to MIT to become a civil engineer.
Okay, so he's big time. So actually he has some really good academic accolades. He's not just the smart kid that doesn't fit in the conventional school, which I was about to interject here, be like, every story I hear from Fat Electrician with all these war heroes and all that stuff, so many of those guys have the same story, right? They're like geniuses, but like, again, a lot of the traditional organization just like if society just like doesn't work with them, whether it's school or they were delinquents as they were young, or even when they get in the military, they don't quite fit in, but they got this incredible amount of skill. It looks like that guy is like, I don't know, playing both worlds at this moment.
Rejected by MIT because his grades were lacking his freshman year. So he drives his Whippet that he rebuilt all the way to MIT.
That's
and
impressive,
he camps
man.
outside the admissions office for days until they agree to meet him. He then goes in and proceeds to persuade the head of admissions to let him into MIT. So he gets into MIT, goes on to become an engineer.
Impressive.
While he's at college, he joins the ROTC program,
MIT
which is like
it's
the
big brain.
pre-officer training program that they have at most colleges. While he's there, he ends up flying a plane, and he absolutely loves it. It is now his new goal in life to become a fighter pilot. So naturally, he applies to go off to Army Air School to become a pilot, at which point he is pretty much immediately informed there's a 0% chance that he will ever get inside of a fighter plane.
Why?
Because he's way too big. At this point in time, they only let the smaller guys be the fighter pilots, and all the bigger guys had to go work in bombers, and Jay was a big dude, well over 6 foot. So it's not exactly what he wanted, but it is
well
the next
over,
best
like, because there's a big difference between like 6'1" and like 6'8", 6'9". You know what I mean? So whatever. Still.
No big deal. He goes in, does the paperwork, does the physical exam. Bad news, his eyes suck, and his vision is not good enough to become a pilot. So the entire notion of being a pilot
that usually kills a lot of
at least. He goes back to college, continues going through the ROTC program to be an Army infantry officer, and while this is going on, he's constantly researching on ways to make his eyes better, and he finally comes across this crazy optometrist named Dr. Bates, and he has the Bates method. Basically, this method wanted to treat your eyes like they were muscles. Bates believed that glasses enabled your eyes to be lazy, so he would crush his patients' glasses and then force them to do a bunch of eye straining exercises in hopes of building up better vision, similar to how you would lift weights to get bigger muscles. One of these exercises included staring directly into the sun. Obviously, with hindsight being 2020, this didn't work that well, and it certainly wasn't recommended, but the young Jay Zeamer wanted to be a pilot so bad that he was in fact willing to go outside every day and attempt to beat the sun in a staring contest.
Okay. There's no way this can work. There's a reason they tell us, okay, don't look at eclipses and you buy the funny glasses and all this stuff. I'm actually intrigued, though. Please don't tell me it works and we've been wrong this whole time.
Deep burn.
Or look at the two suns from
essentially trying to give himself a caveman version of LASIK. Obviously, this does not improve his eyesight. If anything, it makes it better, but it does highlight just how bad this guy wanted to be a pilot. So, World War II kicks off, standards get lowered, and he gets accepted into the bombing program. And from there, he becomes the top of his class pretty much immediately. He is so good at flying bombers that he can actually perform fighter maneuvers inside of a bomber, which is something
so you can fly that if you have bad eyesight?
But not only is he naturally talented at it, he also works extremely hard. He could tell every single American, German, and Japanese plane and their capabilities just by their silhouette.
Friend or foe?
Wow.
Foe! No, you idiots! It's a pigeon!
So Jay Zeamer...
So he has this incredible engineering acumen to him. He can see something, analyze it. Some people, again, are just kind of built that way. Have you ever met someone that is that type of visual learner? And again, just like so mechanically wired, you could, show them something, break it down, and then they could like put it back together again. Yeah.
Is hands down the best bomber pilot.
I'm jealous. I don't have that.
Somewhere along the lines, during training, he becomes friends with the best bombardier in training by the name of Joe Sarnofsky. This guy is basically the Larry Bird at putting warheads on foreheads. They hit it off.
I love Larry Bird.
They have a ton in common. After they graduate...
So wait. Okay, so if he's the Larry Bird of that, first off, that means he's a massive trash talker. If you don't know, go ahead and just look at Larry Bird trash talking stories. And he was also completely underrated by so many people that saw him. They're like, dude, he's this slow, looks kind of out of shape, like white dude, and then would bust you up on the court. I love Larry Bird. So this guy's got to be good.
Missions, and they get separated. So early 1942, Jay Zeamer gets assigned to the 5th Air Force, and he's not happy about it because the 5th Air Force is also referred to as the Forgotten Fifth. The reason they're called that is because they are stationed in Australia, and their job right now is to basically run a containment war against Japan, trying to slow them down and contain them to the Pacific. And
sure. So this is earlier, time in World War II. United States is not fighting really in mainland Europe yet. This is like pre-D-Day. way. What they're focused on actually at this time is protecting Australia. So Australia was being attacked by the Japanese. You know, they had spread their empire throughout much of the Pacific and the South Pacific there, and were launching attacks on the northern coast there. And one of the things the United States does pretty quickly after Pearl Harbor and of course getting into the war was helping to defend them. That's why like Guadalcanal is going to be such a important early battle, because you could stage a lot of attacks to northern Australia from there. So this guy is actually very early into the war itself.
At this point in time, nobody cares about the Pacific theater. The entire world is watching the European theater as America and Great Britain fight their way through North Africa into Italy to take back France and eventually overthrow Germany. That's where the majority of the funding's going. That's where all the attention and glory is. That's the place where young, motivated men like Jay Zeamer want to be.
Which, by the way, is a shame just for the fact of what Japan was doing. They're conquering the brutality of things going on. Yeah, indeed, has and still is often pushed under the rug by so many people that think about World War II. And you just have those big characters of what's going on in Europe. You got Stalin and you got Mussolini and you got Angry Mustache Man. It's actually really kind of a shame, especially outside of the in the United States, of course, we talked to them, but how many people don't talk about it?
Attention and glory is. That's the place where young, motivated men like Jay Zeamer want to be. But that didn't happen. So Jay shows up to Australia. He is the FNG, the fucking new guy. Nobody trusts him. He has zero street cred. Nobody wants him in their crew. Now, this is partially due to the fact that he's a new guy, and that's just how it goes for new guys, sure. But mainly, it's because the Japanese are kind of kicking America's ass right now. It's mid-1942. America just got involved in this war. A lot of their pilots are inexperienced. A lot of their equipment's outdated. And everybody's giving all the funding to the European theater. So it's not a great time. And you got
I mean, the U.S. is still Lend-Lease, you know, sending stuff to Europe. They're sending stuff to the Soviet Union, of course, the British. So they're getting kind of stretched thin. But you're going to see as this is going on here in this earlier years, American manufacturing just going into overall high gear. Again, you're fighting the Japanese, who have been doing this stuff now for years. Go back to 1931, 1937, whatever you want to talk about, when the war really starts in the Pacific. But that will eventually come back and get the Americans the victory, just the out manufacturing. But this is the hard time. This is the very difficult time where they had to learn very, very slowly.
You got to remember, since this is 1942, America hasn't come out with the Hellcat or the Corsair yet, meaning that America has no fighter plane capable of going toe-to-toe with the Japanese Mitsubishi Zero. So even if the bombers did have a fighter...
Yes, Mitsubishi. Yep, they made that. They made war materials for them. They were also one of the biggest manufacturers in Japan, just so you know. They actually have an interesting founding story, actually founded by a guy that was a former samurai. When the samurai become abolished, he, like a lot of samurai did, ended up going into business, and he learned a lot of manufacturing, metallurgy, steel production, that kind of stuff from the British. Ends up building Mitsubishi, one of the biggest manufacturers of the era. And you don't hear about him as much with cars and stuff. I mean, like if you grew up around the 90s, you remember some of the Mitsubishis, but still such an important company in economic history, really, not just Japanese.
Fighter escort, they weren't capable of going toe-to-toe with the Japanese Zeros anyways, so it has never been more dangerous to be inside of a bomber. It has never been more important to have everybody in that bomber crew as good as possible to increase everybody's chances of survival. If so facto, nobody wants to risk it on giving a new guy a shot. So it becomes apparent to Jay early on that if he ever wants to get up in the air, he's going to have to do some gangster shit. So he goes over to the bulletin board, and on that bulletin board are the missions that are deemed so incredibly dangerous that they are volunteer basis only, and he starts volunteering for all of them, filling in any position where he's needed. The majority of these missions will wind up being reconnaissance.
And I get it. Okay, when you're like new to the war, you're like, you don't understand. You're very ignorant to war. But like, if you've been through stuff before, you know, really got some bullets grazing by your ear, they've nicked your plane, like you start to rethink and get a little bit of humble pie of what war is actually like. So if you've actually been through something and you're signing up for these deadly missions, you got to screw loose in your brain, but of course you need those people in war.
missions, which is where they're going to take a B-17 flying fortress. Instead of filling it with bombs, they're going to fill it with extra fuel tanks, equip it with cameras, and send it way off into enemy-held territory all by itself to hopefully get some valuable intel. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, a single bomber flying alone in enemy-held territory is extremely dangerous, and nobody is about to let their pilot or co-pilot be the brand new guy fresh out of school. So
makes sense, because this thing, flying fortress, it's the size of a fortress. You're like, oh, there it is. You know, you are going to be intercepted.
And nobody is about to let their pilot or co-pilot be the brand new guy fresh out of school, so Jay just has to fill in wherever there's a gap. Over time, he winds up doing everything. He's a tail gunner, a ball gunner, a waist gunner, a navigation guy, a radio guy. He can do everything, and eventually he works himself up enough credit that they let him be co-pilot for a little while. And while he's working as a co-pilot, he figures out something very, very important. You have to remember, he's an engineer. He loves taking things apart, figuring out how they work, why they work, trying to make them better. And while he's
good guy to have on your crew,
he figures out how the Japanese Zeros are tackling the B-17s. You have to remember, this is 1942. The B-17s that they are flying are the B-17Bs. They are the first generation of mass-produced B-17s ever, and they have one fatal flaw, and the Japanese figured out how to exploit it. You see, the B-17s have a ton of machine guns all over them to defend themselves. They have a tail gunner, a ball gunner, a waist gunner on each side, and a turret on top. The problem is, none of those can shoot in front of the plane. The only thing the front of the plane has is two 30 caliber flex guns, which you can kind of see right here, which might as well be nothing at all when it comes to shooting down an actual plane. Later.
So, I mean, it seems like the clear answer would have some that go forward, right? But remember, a lot of like big bombers like this don't just fly alone. You have fighters that escort these planes sometimes, so they can pick off some of those like fighter planes. But again, this is supposed to be more of a what sounds like stealthier recon mission, even though it's a giant thing. So not having protection, I guess that is normal for them. So I guess that's why they hadn't built it in the first place, because it wasn't really meant to be like that. Meant to be escorted.
Later generations of the B-17 would end up getting more firepower and turrets on the front to help alleviate this issue, but at this point in time, they didn't have that, so the Japanese Zeros would approach from behind, well out of range of the machine guns, pass the B-17 altogether, and then go and do a U-turn and approach the B-17 head-on and shoot it down, where the B-17 had no way to defend itself. And during his time as a co-pilot, Jay Zeamer caught on to this and developed a plan. Fast forward, Jay Zeamer on his first mission, he finally got enough street cred, and there was finally a mission dangerous enough that they were going to let him be the pilot. Sure enough, a Japanese Zero shows up, does the exact same thing, passes outside the range of the guns, does a big U-turn, comes back to confront Jay's B-17
What'd he do?
head-on. As soon as the Zero gets within range, Jay takes his B-17, turns it up on a wingtip, and banks, exposing the belly of the B-17 to the Zero, forcing the Zero to go the exact opposite direction and down, putting it directly in the firing lines of both the belly gunner and the tail gunner, shooting down the Zero. And so that is just one of multiple.
So it's banking and turning, and then you get the angle of the guns that can do that. They can't go forward, but they can go sideways like that. That makes sense. But man, seems like it would be so hard to, like, if you were one of those gunners, when you're banking like that, you've got all of these other forces and your equilibrium's all messed up. Again, you're turning, gravity's doing weird things to you. It seems like it'd be really hard to aim and like keep your cognition when you're doing something like this. Now, again, I'm not a fighter pilot, but correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't that make it extremely difficult? But again, it's not like you have a lot of choice, and this could probably be pretty successful.
Combat maneuvers that Jay has engineered inside of his head, pushing the B-17 airframe to its absolute limit. Fast forward into the mission, he lands the plane, no problem. The entire crew gets out and swears that they are never getting on a plane with Jay Zeamer flying.
They're probably throwing up.
And that becomes the new norm for a couple months. Jay went from the new guy that nobody trusted to fly to now he's so good, he's crazy, and we're scared to fly with him. That was until a bunch of new reinforcements showed up on the island, and among them was none other than his best friend, Joe Sarnowski. So Jay and Joe start volunteering to go on a bunch of dangerous missions together. Same thing happens every time they fly on a mission. Pretty much everybody else on the plane refuses to ever go on a mission with those two ever again because they're absolutely crazy. But every once in a while, they find somebody just crazy enough to keep flying with them. And over the course of a couple months, they build up an entire air crew that starts volunteering together on every dangerous mission available, earning them the nickname the Eager Beavers.
Yeah, okay. I gotta know. Okay, I gotta know here. All right, let's look at these guys. Do any of them look like beavers? Maybe the bottom right guy. Yeah, I don't know.
Bud Thule, apparently the only man smart enough to be a navigator and crazy enough to fly with these guys. And then, of course, we have Jay Zeamer as the pilot, Joe Sarnofsky as the bombardier. And from there, it just gets completely out of hand because after that, we have the radio expert, William Vaughn, aka Willie. He is one of the most experienced bomber crew members in the entire U.S. military at this point.
Good crew.
Countless missions.
Ballsy pilot.
One of which his B17
navigator.
landed to refuel when his crew was ambushed by 500 Japanese soldiers. They took the machine guns out of their B17 and proceeded to defend themselves in a firefight for 10 hours until the Australians showed back up. And during that 10 hours,
where you
Willie
at,
had
Aussies?
14
Took you so long.
Kills, 4 of which were in close quarters combat, 2 with his Colt 45 1911, and 2 with his knife. Jay Zeamer said he didn't plan on getting in any knife fights at 30,000 feet, but if he did, he had Willie. Next, we have camera expert and waist gunner George Kendrick. Typically on a B-17, you're supposed to have one waist gunner on either side of the plane, but Kendrick preferred to man both sides completely by himself. When Jay Zeamer asked him if he wanted to find another waist gunner for the other side, Kendrick said, and I quote, "These are my guns and I'm going to shoot all of them. I don't need to be bumping asses with another guy while I do it," which is the most American shit I've ever heard in my entire life. Next,
I'm not sharing these machine guns. For real. I love it.
we have Johnny Abel.
All right, this guy is too pretty. Okay. This guy's full of himself. He's all up in front of the mirror, getting looking good for his mission and all this stuff. His name's Johnny Abel, pilot in training. Yeah, young kid. Here we go.
19-year-old farm kid that's so mechanically gifted that he is deemed more valuable as a mechanic on the ground than he is a member of a bombing crew. Despite that, he wants to be a pilot. So Jay is teaching him how to become a pilot.
We'll have farm equipment, maybe.
He's the topside turret gunner.
Tractors
Next,
and
we have
stuff.
the tail gunner, and he is the biggest, fastest, strongest man in the entire 5th Air Force.
There's the Beaver,
Pugh, aka Pudge. There was a couple other stragglers that came and went.
Gotta be a guy named Pudge.
Missions here, a couple missions there, but this was it. This was a core group of men that became best friends and went on the most dangerous bombing runs and reconnaissance missions that the war had to offer. Because of this, they very quickly built up an incredible reputation and became too valuable to lose. At which point, leadership doesn't let them go out on the dangerous missions anymore, and they send them out on a regular bombing run with like 10 other B-17s, and if that wasn't bad enough, they're going to make Jay and his men be the first bomber in line, which if you don't know is the safest bomber in the entire run, because as soon as their bombs hit the ground, that's what alerts the enemy that they're even there. So when they go through, there's no enemies manning the anti-aircraft guns. So they're done and gone by the time there's any enemies returning fire. It's that second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh,
unless they're ready for you, right?
This is the real danger, and that's just not okay with Jay and his men. So they go out on the mission just like they're ordered to, and they are the first ones to drop their bombs, just like they're ordered to. They make a clean getaway. They get out to open ocean, at which point Jay tells his men, get ready for a fight, because he does a U-turn, goes back in, flies over the enemy compound at 1,000 feet, while his men from the ball turret, the waist guns, and the tail guns open fire on the enemy's anti-aircraft positions on the ground, literally becoming a ground attack plane like they're an antique C-130.
Okay, so that was what I was about to say. I'm like, you going in there, you become the attack the attack plane, the protector, by going back in there. That is pretty gutsy. I mean, you could easily just be like, all right, we're going back to refuel or whatever, or something like that. But they're like, no, we're going on the offensive. That's impressive.
We're able to knock out all of the enemy spotlights and most of their anti-aircraft positions, and every single B-17 on that mission made it back home. So Jay, the Eager Beavers, and all the other B-17s on this mission make it back to base completely okay.
Unless I missed it, did you say that what the location exactly was that they're bombing? Okay, so I mean, again, they were protecting Australia. Again, the Japanese are using some of those islands again, like Guadalcanal, the stuff that's right north of Australia. But did he say? Did I miss that part about who they're bombing in this one?
Okay, at which point,
Or where
Jay
I
is
mean?
treated like a hero by his commanding officers. No, I'm just kidding. You see, the commanding officers can't give themselves a bunch of medals if their men are defying orders but doing the right thing because it makes them look bad. So naturally,
This is
Jay
every video he
somehow the bad
covers.
guy here. So he and the eager Beavers are all confined to quarters pending court-martial. The only reason that Jay and his entire crew weren't kicked out of the military right then and there was because there was a journalist in Australia with the 5th Air Force that heard the story from one of the other B-17 crews, and they reported on it, writing a story that would end up getting read by a congressman that wanted it investigated, and he demanded and ordered that chain of command to give Jay, Joe, and all of his men on that air crew a silver star. So
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, if you're the one that was on the beneficial side of it, like the rest of those bombers, or of course, Australia, and again, let's get the context here. The Japanese have been bombing the crap out of the northern border. There's oil-rich regions in that area. I mean, that was fueling so much of this Japanese attack anyways. You had the oil embargo by the U.S. Remember, that was the response to Pearl Harbor and all that. But yeah, you don't care what the methods are. If you got helped, you're going to be appreciative. But at the same time, it's like, if you're the American command, you can't have this precedent set that you can just do whatever. You know what I mean? Even if you are successful, it's like, where do you draw that line?
at that point,
What do you
Jay
guys
and all of
think?
his men get a silver star. Leadership just kind of has to drop the issue, but also, fuck these guys. We're not going to give them easy missions anymore. We're only going to give them the hardest missions we have. And if
Okay.
they die, they die. We don't really care anymore because they made us look bad. Which is exactly what Jay and his men wanted all along, so it all works
What's
out. All right,
next?
fast forward, next big dangerous mission, officially known as Flight of the Geishas. Naval code breakers have deciphered enough messages to figure out that in the city of Rabaul, there's a hotel, and the penthouse of that hotel is being used as an exclusive officers club where they are being entertained by a bunch of geishas and getting hammered. And among those officers is...
Man, okay, you had the geishas, but have you ever heard of the comfort houses the Japanese created in China? Basically, they took women and they became those type of slaves, essentially. It was absolutely horrific. So
rumored to be none other than Admiral Yamamoto, the leader of the entire Japanese
Yamamoto
Navy.
himself?
Their mission is to fly in with a single B-17 under the cover of night, bomb that hotel, take out all the high-ranking officers, and make a clean getaway.
Dude, that
Jay
could be
and
a
the crew get pulled
massive
in, they get
thing.
briefed on the mission, no big deal. Everybody's going to go off to bed. They got a big day tomorrow. Everybody except for Joe Sarnowski.
Yamamoto doesn't-
He stays up all night long studying the map of the city of Rabaul. Nobody knows
How
why.
does he get out?
They just think he's overcautious. They go to bed. Joe stays up. Fast forward the next day, they take off on their mission. Jay flies them all the way there, gets them real close to the hotel, at which point Jay can actually send the controls of the plane over to Joe Sarnowski in the bomb bay, so Joe can control the plane and really line up the shot that he wants.
Wow,
with
you
this
can do
bomb.
that?
So Jay sends the controls over to Joe. Joe opens the bomb doors and veers way off course, miles and miles off
no.
course, like 10 miles off course. Joe steers this plane, essentially blind, driving the plane just from what he can see outside of the bomb bay. And then, before anybody even knows what's happening, Joe just says bombs away, drops the bombs on a seemingly random location, and sends the controls back over to Jay. Everyone is completely confused. Nobody knows what's going on. The bombs make impact, and there is a humongous explosion, way bigger than this 500
Oh,
bomb
no, what'd they
could have
hit?
ever done on its own. Joe had just hit a major ammunition depot for the entire Japanese Navy, and his single bomb
By accident?
set off a chain reaction, blowing up the entire facility. Come to find out,
oh my gosh, I was about to say, like, this is such an epic fail, but I guess they're going to get some kind of positivity out of it. I mean, obviously hitting Yamamoto would have been a major thing, highest ranking person out here, but yeah, this is crazy. Now, they weren't, I guess when they changed those the controls, are you not using the navigator, because these planes had navigators, right? So was that just kind of bypassing that, I guess?
now Joe Sarnowski didn't feel right about killing innocent geisha girls.
Yeah.
And he decided
Oh, he
that
did
he
on
was going to
purpose?
find a target that was just as, if not more valuable than the officers club, and blow that up instead. So they make it back to base, tell leadership everything that happened, and leadership is absolutely
pissed.
furious that they decided to do their own thing instead. They interrogate the entire crew, but nobody is ratting on Joe Sarnowski.
So they're like, yeah, you could have had one of the leading figures, right? And he's right up there with like Tojo. You know, would it change the course of the war? I don't know. But again, these guys worship their generals and their admirals like they were gods. But, well, I mean, there's going to be plenty of civilians dying in some of these in these areas, unfortunately. But all right.
Something, didn't you, Jerry?
I did not say nothing, man. Why you always?
I did.
What you say?
I told him I'm gonna bang his wife.
Kind of
So as a
quiet, sorry.
punishment, they're ordered to do the mission again, and this time do it right. But that is essentially a death sentence because now
Yeah,
they
they're
know
ready.
that the Americans are bombing the city, and they're going to be on high alert.
But the
So they're
officers
just
even
going to
gonna
do it
be there
anyways,
anymore?
and I think leadership was actually trying to get them killed, but it's not really going to work out that way. So crew goes to bed early.
It was like a
Joe
win-win
Sarnowski
situation.
Stays up all night again, studying the map of the city of Rabaul. And yet again, the same exact thing happens. Jay gets them all the way there completely undetected, sends the controls of the plane over to Joe. Joe opens the bomb bay, veers way off course, miles and miles off course, bombs a seemingly random location, and there is an even bigger explosion than the day before. It is an enormous explosion. Jay had just taken out a major fuel depot.
And he knew this?
For the entire Japanese Navy.
He knew this? Oh, see, okay, and that is almost even bigger because every week and month as this thing goes on, the Japanese fuel situation becomes absolutely dire. It's the biggest thing that was like fueling their imperialism was you have this Navy, right? And this military completely dependent on oil. And the problem with Japan is they were completely dependent on foreign oil. That's why the embargo the Americans put on was such a big deal. And also why they're going to start taking over oil-rich regions around the Philippines and Indonesia and that. By the way, you see the desperation of the lack of fuel towards the end of the war when you start seeing the kamikaze, because literally they're running out of fuel and this was the only way they could do attacks anymore. Holy crap.
Back to base, at which point they are effectively grounded and leadership will never give them a B-17 to fly again.
Can't trust them anymore.
Refuse to follow orders. And
Can't
they are
trust
given
them.
absolutely no credit for single-handedly bombing major fuel and ammunition depots in the city of Rabaul. All right, so leadership's being a bunch of dicks.
I
They're
bet
not gonna
civilians
let Jay
died
and
there,
the
though.
Beavers-
I mean, that's the thing. When you have that kind of stuff, there's always going to be civilians around. Again, maybe not in the social center of one of these towns with these hotels, but I would think that would still have happened with the civilian deaths.
fly any more of the good B-17s, which sucks because at that point there's really nothing that they can do unless they plan on building their own airplane, which is exactly what they do. So Jay and the
They got
Beavers go out to the
engineers, man.
boneyard, and the boneyard is not just where planes go to die. They go there to be cannibalized for any good parts
scrapped.
they may have left to keep all the other planes still
Scrapped.
running. And what they come across is what used to be a B-17.
Wait, is
it has
that-
been stripped
was
of
that
every
it?
usable part and is covered in bullet holes, and there is no way that this thing is gonna fly. The only identifying characteristics of this plane at all was the faded word Lucy up on the front and the tail number 2666, which would later bring about its nickname, Old 666.
Oh, okay,
So now
okay.
they have a plane, they just
Cool,
need to
cool.
fix it. A seemingly impossible task, but they have Jay Zeamer, the engineer, and Johnny Abel, the 19-year-old
Yeah.
mechanical prodigy, that set forward restoring this plane, while everybody else on the crew goes out and steals all the parts they need to do it. I mean, strategically transfers equipment to an alternate location. Some of the
All right, I'll have to wear that shirt if I can remember the next time. The steel shirt. It's one of the ones you can buy. You got to check it out. I would still be very wary to fly a plane like that had to do that many modifications and have that many parts changed out. I mean, it was already scary to fly with these guys, but now with a plane that I could not be confident that it was going to be reliable.
equipment that the Eager Beavers managed to acquire included 4 new Cyclone engines, radio equipment,
Wow, how'd they get-
camera equipment,
Can't s-
and 19 50 caliber machine guns. Right off the bat, we have a problem.
Okay, how
because
did they just get that stuff? You can't just steal all that stuff, can you? It's, if so, it's really scary that our military can't protect their own weapons like that. Now, I've heard of the nukes that apparently are missing out there, but something like this doesn't make me feel any better.
right around the time that the Beavers start finding all of this amazing equipment, a bunch of other air crews seemingly have lost a bunch of their amazing equipment. So a bunch of them are going to go back and try to steal it off of Old 666, at which point the only logical solution is for the entire crew to start living on Old 666 while they restore it all day and all
Protecting
night
it.
and spread the word that the 50 caliber machine guns
Another-
are loaded. And if that doesn't work, you get to fight Willie about it. At this point, leadership has completely lost
Big
control of
Willie.
the situation. Everybody's calling Jay Zeamer and the Eager Beavers pirates.
Wait. Where's this the supervisors here? Who's supervising these guys? This is obviously not allowed for of them to do. How can you just like secretly build this with no accountability? Is that another thing that was just going on, I guess, in the Pacific War? You couldn't watch everybody.
Point, leadership has completely lost control of the situation. Everybody's calling Jay Zeamer and the Eager Beavers pirates, renegades. Everybody's looking at leadership to stop them. At which point, leadership is kind of like, fuck, I think they might be talking to me too, and I don't want to fight Willie, so we're all just going to look the other way. Like we talked about earlier in the video, there's not much firepower at the front of a B17.
That explains it.
So they take a 50 caliber machine gun, mount it right on the nose cone, and they line it up with the rivet line going down the center of the cab, and they rig it up so that there's a button inside the cockpit for Jay Zeamer to hit to be able to fire the 50 caliber machine gun. So all he has to do is aim the rivet line at the enemy and fire.
I was going to say, okay, if these guys were going to be able to build it, and I said that would still be kind of scary and all that, but if they were going to do it successfully, you knew it was probably going to be an improvement on the original and actually using some of the stuff that's already there to its like strategic output, and just making it more efficient. Like let these guys, I guess, do their thing. And you think here, I don't know, they're still probably going to get in trouble, but you know, maybe they could have given a lot of useful feedback about how to actually design these B17s.
Calls it his schnozzler gun. Is aim the rivet line at the enemy and fire.
I gotta hear that again.
His schnozzler gun.
I
Then
love
the
it.
other two 30 caliber guns on the front of the
touch my
B17 are
schnozzler.
replaced with 50 cals. The navigator compartment usually had one 30 caliber
50
machine
cals.
gun. Now it's going to have dual 50s. Then the seat for the radio guy,
thing's a
who typically never
beast.
even had a gun. Oh well, we're going to cut a hole in the plane and give him two 50 caliber machine guns as well. Then we get to George Kendrick's area, the waist guns.
There's just this
Typically,
much
there's
stuff
one 50
laying
caliber
around.
on each side.
Double it!
Now we're getting dual 50s on each side, and because that's not enough, we're also going to cut another hole in the bottom of the plane and give him dual 50s there as well. That way, when Jay banks up in front of the zero, not only can the ball turret gunner hit
Oh
the
my
zero,
gosh, they're gonna have so
Kendrick is
much.
also going to be able to hit the zero as well. Then, in
Shoot
case any of
every
the guns
direction.
malfunction, they have 3 extra 50 caliber machine guns strapped down on the inside of the plane. Old 666 now has more than double the firepower of any other B-17 in the Pacific Theater, and after shedding over 2,000 pounds, it is also the fastest. But all that firepower isn't going to be worth a whole lot if they don't know how to use it. So
Yeah.
Jay and Johnny continue working on the plane while everybody else is sent out to go train and become experts on the M2 50 caliber machine gun. The
Okay.
Beavers get to the point where every single member of the crew can assemble and disassemble the M2 Browning in under a minute while blindfolded. Joe and Jay also make it a rule that every gunner
Oh
inside
my
of their
gosh.
aircraft has to link their own ammunition belts, and they're going to change up how they do ammunition. You see, at this point, a B-17 50 caliber machine gun had an ammo link that went armor piercing round, incendiary round, tracer. If you don't know, a tracer is like the little one that looks like a laser beam
Right.
coming out from Star Wars. They do that so that you can tell
Yeah,
where
where
your
you're
fire is
shooting.
going, and so that your friends can see where your fire is
Yeah.
going. They start linking their
Especially
ammunition, so it's
useful
armor
in,
piercing
at
round,
nighttime.
tracer round. And they do this for psychological warfare, because when you're shooting every other round as a tracer round out of a machine gun, it is going to look like old 666 is something out of Star Wars, straight up shooting laser beams at the enemy.
Yeah, exactly.
So they finish up the plane and they start volunteering for every single dangerous mission that they can find. They volunteer
Dude, I
for
bet
so
they
many
wrecked.
missions so often that they
Cooked
never actually got
everyone.
an opportunity to finish the nose art on the plane like you see all the other bombers have in the movies and in the old pictures.
nose art.
And that's why the plane never got a cooler nickname other than its tail number, Old 666.
That's a
now,
cool-
most of these missions,
cool enough
just
to
like
me.
before a recon, it is Jay, the Eager Beavers, and Old 666 going up into enemy territory completely by themselves. And every single time they come into enemy zeros, they light them up. The new machine guns are incredible, and Old 666 is the aerial equivalent of George Foreman on his second title run. It's big, he's fat, he's got terrible gas mileage, but if
Yeah.
you're gonna stand in the pocket
Heavy,
and trade
dude.
with them, you're probably gonna get put in the ground.
Yeah.
Allegedly, with the combination of increased speed,
You want that
increased
guy on your team,
firepower,
okay.
Jay's piloting tactics, and the entire crew's newfound machine gun proficiency, they were shooting down so many enemies that it became unbelievable. So the crew came back and people started doubting them. So they're like, fine, we're just gonna rig up the cameras to turn on every time we start firing the machine guns. That way, we film us shooting down the enemy fighters, which is the most world star shit I've ever heard in my entire life. They were literally kicking so much ass that to get people to believe them, they had to prematurely invent the GoPro 70 years ahead of time. The beatings continue for a little while. Old 666, the eager Beavers, and Jay Zeamer build up this enormous reputation, and eventually leadership would approach Jay with the most dangerous mission he'd ever heard of. All right, so here's the mission. The Marines are going to make a 40,000 man amphibious landing in Bougainville. But before they do that, they wanted to get aerial footage over the coastline because they wanted to find out where all the reefs were so the Marine Corps didn't get caught up on the reefs with their amphibious landing vehicles. The problem with that is the only way to get enough high definition in
the reefs are, it's such a problematic thing. One of the stories that came to my mind about where reefs really messed things up was actually the Bay of Pigs invasion, if you've heard of that, in the 1960s, where the CIA was training basically some exiled Cubans to land and do a coup of Fidel Castro. And they, I guess, didn't know the region very well, and reefs got in the way, and the soldiers couldn't get out on the shores that they wanted to. And if you know about the Bay of Pigs invasion, it was a massive failure. And that was one of the kind of technical problems of that.
That footage to be able to see reefs that are underwater is to use a trimetragon camera setup, which is 3 cameras where they merge all the footage together. And the only way to actually film this and make it work is to fly in a perfectly straight line under perfect weather conditions, and they can't move the plane at all. Even a single degree of tilt would ruin the entire thing. And in order to film this coastline, they're going to have to do that for 22 minutes straight in enemy territory, and that enemy territory may or may not have enemy fighters and anti-aircraft guns on the coast. And if there is anti-aircraft guns on the coast, it's pretty much game over, because again, they have to fly in a perfectly straight line for 22 minutes straight in broad fucking daylight. The worst gunner on the planet has enough time to get dialed in and shoot
Stormtroopers.
And that's assuming they even make it to the coastline,
notoriously bad
because Bougainville is 600 miles into enemy-held territory. Because of this, the leadership only approached Jay with this mission because they were just hoping that he would pilot it. They never in their wildest dreams imagined that his entire crew would volunteer to go on this mission because it had such a low chance of survival. Despite that, after being briefed on the entire thing, Jay rushes over to the barracks where the Beavers are, briefs them on the entire thing, and he's like, look, I'm calculating there's like a 10% chance that we survive this. I don't expect any of you to go with me. I don't blame you if you don't.
They all go, huh?
But if you do want to volunteer, there's nobody I would rather have up there with me than you guys. At which point, every single one of the eager Beavers stands up, and they're going with him.
Whose car are we gonna take?
Later on,
Captain, my Captain.
One of the Beavers is quoted as saying, "We thought so much of Captain Zeamer and his abilities that we didn't give a damn where we went, just so long as he wanted to go there. Anything okay by him was okay by us." Jay then runs back over to the colonel that had just briefed him. As he is pinning the volunteer slip onto the board to collect volunteers for this mission, Jay grabs a paper, crumples it up, says that him and the eager Beavers are going to take the mission on one condition. He does it how he wants to do it, and they have no further input. He will get the mission done. At which point the colonel agrees and it's settled. The only thing to do now is to get prepared for the mission and wait for Army meteorologists to tell them that they're going to have a day clear enough to actually pull this off. It's monsoon season. A couple of weeks go by, and then finally
weather, it's such so hard to predict. Obviously back then you always had to have contingency plans, because the meteorology just not even close to what we can do today. It actually reminds me of when they decide to use the second atomic bomb, the one that goes on Nagasaki, which actually was not the primary target of it. That was the plan B, because the original target had cloud cover, and then they went over to Nagasaki.
They get word from the Army weather guys, hey, tomorrow's the day the weather's gonna break, you can get this mission done. So they all get prepped and they take off first thing in the morning when it's still dark out for this dangerous mission. So they take off, they're making their way over to Bougainville, they get like halfway there, it's still dark out, everything's going great, and leadership radios over to Jay and they're like, hey, by the way, extra credit, it would be pretty cool if you could pop up to the top of the island and film Buka Passage as well. We don't need trimetragon footage, just normal footage would work, you can do it while it's still kind of dusk out. If you could get that done
Bonus
too,
point.
that'd be great. At which point Jay is like, no, I don't need extra credit during this extremely dangerous mission. That wasn't what we agreed to.
Already have an A.
I'm not doing that. Then they're like, well, too bad, it's an order. To which he just hangs up on the guy. He doesn't really care. He's going to do what he wants anyways, because that's been his MO the entire time. Fast forward. They get all the way to Bougainville. It's still too dark out for them to start filming with this Trimetragon footage. So Jay asks the crew, and he's like, look, I can do a U-turn. We can fly 15 minutes out over the open ocean, do another U-turn, come back. That'll be half an hour. That should be bright enough by then. Or we could fly like 45 minutes north, film Buka Passage, and then come back and do this after. And the crew is like, whatever, I don't care. So they go, they film Buka Passage, then they come back. It is now broad daylight, so they start filming their Trimetragon footage. They get 5 minutes into the 22-minute run, and they come up on a Japanese airstrip. And on that airstrip is over 20 Japanese Zeros, and he can see men running out to the planes
they're loading up
to come get him. Now, Jay doesn't realize it at this point, but these weren't just normal Japanese Zeros. This was one of the best fighter squadrons that Japan had that was specifically brought in to go take out Admiral Halsey. And in this squadron, they had 2 aces with a combined over 30 confirmed air-to-air kills. And even if this wasn't a specialized badass fighter squadron, 20 on 1 is still completely undoable. They'd gone up against 5, 6, 7 Zeros. They'd never gone up against 10, let alone 20 plus. It's at this moment that Jay has to make a decision, because he knows that by the time all the Japanese Zeros get up in the sky, get in their formation, and actually attack him, he's going to have just enough time to finish this camera run. However, then he's going to have to fight his way out, which is probably a death sentence. Or he could cut and run right now, and he's almost guaranteed to be able to get away with a 20-minute head start. He's taken a second to weigh his options and really think about it, and he's just about ready to cut and run, and he looks down at the water, and he can just see all these reefs just right below the water, and he just envisions 40,000 Marines and their amphibious landing vehicles.
This intel has to get back.
Getting cut down by enemy defenses and machine gun fire. And he decides that he's going to risk it to try to save these guys. And for the next 17 minutes, the crew gets ready for a fight as Jay keeps the plane completely straight and level in broad daylight as all the Zeros get up in the air to come get them. Fast forward 17 minutes later, 24 Japanese Zeros have caught up to them, and they are trailing just behind 666 out of the machine gun range. They're gonna try to get in front right as George Kendrick comes over the radio and says, give me 30 more seconds. 3 Zeros pass along the outside, do their U-turn to begin their attack run against 666. Then,
but remember, they've equipped their planes now to be able to shoot forward, to shoot from those other angles. So maybe this could be an advantage, with those Japanese fighters not ready for this.
And George Kendrick radios again that he has the film done. At this point, it's too late for Jay to do his normal evasive maneuver where he plays chicken with one of the Zeros. So he just lines up the nose of the plane and his schnozzler gun with the lead Zero, shooting it down.
That's a funny word.
Sarnofsky down below, inside the nose cone, manning those guns, manages to shoot down one of the other Zeros. And the third and final Zero was able to riddle the cockpit with 20mm cannon fire. This fatally wounds both Jay Zeamer and Joe Sarnofsky, takes out all the navigation equipment for the plane, as well as the entire oxygen system. Jay Zeamer is now slowly bleeding out inside of this cockpit with no way of knowing where he has this plane headed other than instinct and a compass that he's holding in his hand, and he has about 30 seconds of oxygen left before the entire crew passes out from hypoxia. Jeez. And the remaining Japanese Zeros all now know that this is not a normal B17. Their typical tactics aren't going to work, and they just begin swarming every direction they can, firing from all angles. Jay immediately puts the plane into a nosedive, desperately trying to get below 10,000 feet so him and his men can breathe with the oxygen system down. He drops 15,000 feet in just under 30 seconds. That is over 3 miles. In 30 seconds, this plane drops before Jay pulls it back up, and he estimates that they're at 8,000 feet. He doesn't actually know because the altimeter is broken, and the only way he can tell the altitude that they're at is because he's such a good pilot, he can look at the pressure gauge for the engine manifolds and be able to tell. At this point...
Oh my gosh. And how do you keep your consciousness with that? Isn't your blood flowing with these G-forces here? How can you again, just process this? All the rest of the crew probably throwing up and I don't know. Even the tiny little elevation changes when you get a little turbulence in a plane or something, that makes me so uncomfortable.
Point, the entire situation devolves into an all-out chaotic dogfight. Jay, while still bleeding out, is pulling off combat maneuvers inside of a B-17 that most pilots would never even attempt, and his crew instinctively knows how he pilots so that they are able to pick off these Japanese Zeros one by one. Your average dogfight at this point in time lasted for less than a minute, and this dogfight would drag out for over 45 minutes, and the entire time Jay Zeamer is losing more and more blood and more control of the plane, because at some point both rudders would become damaged and he would no longer be able to actually turn the plane using the rudders. But he's such an incredible pilot that he begins individually throttling all 4 motors, throttling one side up and the other side down, turning the plane that way. Throughout the course of this firefight, the Eager Beavers shoot down and completely destroy 5 Japanese Zeros, critically damage and send back a bunch of other ones. And by the end of this firefight, there's 5 or 6 left, fully functional and coming to get them, and they are almost out of ammunition. And right as it looks like this is going to be the end,
75% of them are gone.
the Zeros peel off and do a U-turn as they have to go back because they've ran out of fuel. At this point, Jay Zeamer passes out and the co-pilot is finally allowed to take over the aircraft, something that Jay Zeamer refused to let him do in the heat of the fight. For the entire flight,
yeah, but can this guy handle it now?
Consciousness, and the last thing he remembers is them landing and the ground crew rushing in as he hears the medics say, "Get the pilot last, he's already dead." He would wake up in the hospital days later to find out that he had lost over half the blood in his entire body, but the intel that they had gathered was going to be used to launch Operation Cartwheel, a highly successful Allied offensive that military planners credited that success to the intel that Jay Zeamer and the Eager Beavers had gathered. Because
what a story happening here. I'm trying to unpack all of this right now. So he's losing blood. He's losing all his blood, which you can't think without it. Can't survive, obviously. Doing these, dropping in altitude at insane speeds that should rip apart bodies pretty much. And all while you're being shot at. And oh my gosh, this is insane. This is like one of the most impressive stories I've heard from Fat Electrician, and we've heard a lot of them now.
Because of this, both Jay Zeamer and Joe Sarnofsky were to receive the Medal of Honor. Unfortunately, Joe would have to receive his posthumously. According to the accounts of the rest of the crew, he was struck by a 20mm round during the first engagement. Despite that, he still managed to man the machine guns at the front of the B-17, shooting down an additional 2 Japanese Zeros before succumbing to his wounds. As for the rest of the Eager Beavers, 4 of them sustained injuries, but they all survived, and all of them were awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for this mission, making this the most decorated air crew in U.S. military history, and making this the most decorated mission in U.S. history. According to the official Japanese reports, this story is highly exaggerated because according to them, they only sent up 7 Zeros to intercept Old 666, and none of them were shot down. However, when you take into account the verifiable fact that Old 666 was hit with 5 20mm cannon rounds and sustained over 187 bullet holes, and the crew depleted all of their ammunition, literally thousands of pounds of 50 caliber rounds, it kind of sounds like the Japanese official reports are fucking lying so that they don't look bad. In conclusion, now you know the story of Jay.
Well, yeah, I mean, failing a mission, it's extremely dishonorable. Japanese culture is about honor and success more than any culture ever. Literally, you die and are supposed to die if you can't honorably do your mission. Makes sense. I might fudge something a little bit. All right.
Are fucking lying so that they don't look bad. In conclusion, now you know the story of Jay Zeamer and the Eager Beavers, a bunch of young men that blurred the lines between bravery and insanity that ultimately were deemed so reckless that the government wouldn't give them a B-17 to fly, so they built their own and became the most decorated air crew in American history. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang out.
Like I said, this is one of the most impressive stories I think I have really ever heard, which is from Fat Electrician and just from the war, which is saying a lot because I keep learning more and more as I cover these stories here on my channel. Just like all the different elements of doing that. You have these guys that are like a little bit insane, incredibly courageous, and then have these skills, these like engineering skills, and are able to do this while under pressure. You know, you just add all the elements that you hear about with soldiers and heroic stories of war, and it's like you put all of those together into one story, which is happening here with the eager beavers. So incredible story. I'm so glad I was able to learn it. I feel like in this one, I didn't add as much as I usually do because it was such an interesting specific story, but hopefully you liked watching it with me here. And this was a lot of fun. All right. Hey, thanks again to Fume for sponsoring this video. Again, I really appreciate them sponsoring that. And again, if that sounds interesting to you, if this sounds like something you'd like to check out to kind of, change your habits to better habits, use the link down below right now and get yourself started. And we'll see y'all next time.